One of my favorite features from the Generation 3 Pokémon games was Pokémon Contests. Pokémon Contests are special competitions where Pokémon trainers, called coordinators, enter their Pokémon into one of 5 special categories and have their Pokémon judged in front of a large crowd, with each of their moves having different contest-specific effects and powers. It was a really fun feature that I honestly don't think gets talked about enough these days, and I was super hyped to see that contests were still present in the Generation 3 remakes, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, back when they released in November of 2014, but with a pretty significant visual facelift. Meanwhile, earlier this year, during the Pokémon VGC Knoxville Regional Championships, I saw Fiona Szymkiewicz using a Landorus that had a really cool title affixed to it, Landorus the Shining Star. I didn't know what the title meant, so I looked into it, and it turns out that you get it from the contest star ribbon, one that can only be given to a Pokémon who wins a Master Rank Pokémon contest in every single category. Given that I'd always kind of wanted an excuse to go back and revisit Pokémon contests, not to mention that November 2024 marks the 10-year anniversary of Oras's release. Yes, these games are that old now, and you are slowly marching towards the gaping maw of death. I thought it'd be cool to play a bit of Omega Ruby for the first time in years, and to try and go through every single contest to try and get the Shining Star title for myself. And honestly, what better Pokemon to go on this journey with than one of my other favorite things about Generation 3, my favorite Pokemon of all time, Absol. So grab a handful of Pokeblocks and try not to get too nervous as I take my favorite Pokemon through every single contest in Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. So after I took the time to actually catch myself an Absol and give her my usual nickname, it was time to boost her contest conditions. For the uninitiated, conditions are stats that are used for judging in contests, and also for evolving your Feebas into Milotic in the games that didn't have the Prism scale. The higher the stat, the better you're likely to do in a contest of that same category. But conditions can't be raised by traditional training methods or made more optimal by meticulous egg breeding. The only way to boost them is by making Pokeblocks, these cute little cubic snacks that you make by throwing 4 berries into your portable blender and then feed the resulting block to your Pokemon to boost one contest condition based on the flavor, or all 5 at once if you happen to make a rainbow one. Side note here, but am I the only person who kind of misses the berry blender minigame in the original games? There was honestly something really satisfying about hitting the button at the right times during the blending process that made making the right Pokeblock that much more satisfying. Anyway, after making a few red Pokeblock pluses for the cool stats, I realized there was a bit of a problem. I was quite a bit short on the Pokeblocks that I'd need to actually max out Dreadsight's conditions, and I didn't have nearly enough berries to make them all. So, after some berry farming, so much berry farming. Seriously, I think we all just kind of take for granted just how easy it is to gather tons and tons of berries in Scarlet and Violet compared to this. Dreadsight's contest conditions were all maxed out, and I was all ready to take her through the Hoenn contest circuit. Okay, so at this point you're probably asking me, hey, how do these contests actually work? Pokemon Contest Spectaculars are split into 2 basic segments, the Introduction Round and the Talent Round. The Introduction Round is kind of what it says on the tin. Each coordinator is given time to introduce their beloved Pokemon partner to the audience in the contest hall, with each Pokemon getting a response that corresponds to that Pokemon's category-specific condition stat. In other words, if your contest condition is low, your Pokemon will basically go over like a fart in church, but if the appropriate condition is maxed out, it'll be like an episode of WWE Monday Night Raw in 1998 when the glass shatters. After that is the Talent Round, where the bulk of the contest gameplay actually happens. All 4 Pokemon will get their chance over the course of 5 rounds to use the moves in their moveset to appeal to the audience. The initial turn order is determined by how the introduction round went, with subsequent round turn orders determined by how many appeal hearts each Pokemon earns every round. Doing a move whose contest type corresponds with the actual contest will also get the crowd excited, represented by a star on this little meter on the top left, and if you just so happen to do the move that gets the 5th star on that meter, your Pokemon will go into a special spectacular talent animation, even Mega evolving in the process, if able, to gain itself several bonus hearts for that round. Oh, so I should just do a bunch of moves that give a ton of appeal hearts so I always go first, right? Oh, my sweet summer child. If only it were that simple. See, contest moves don't just have the power to give you appeal hearts. Some could also do what's called jamming to take away appeal hearts from other contestants. So you could use a move that gives you 4 hearts and does nothing else, but then you leave yourself vulnerable to being jammed by a Pokemon going behind you, which could rob you of those hearts you built up and, in some cases, even put you in the negatives. So there are some instances where it's actually smarter to do a move that's less appealing but will set you up for next turn. Something like Bulk Up, which gets you pumped up, represented by a little star icon, which grants you 1 additional heart on future appeal moves per star. Not to mention that doing a low appeal move to purposely go later on the next turn could also put you in a position to really jam up your opponents and ruin their big appeals as well. But even that has a risk factor to it, because some moves also have the chance to make all subsequent Pokemon nervous, which prevents them from acting during that round at all. And considering that the total number of appeal hearts that you gain throughout all 5 rounds helps in the final judging process, losing out on an entire round of appeals could actually be devastating. There's also moves that allow a Pokemon to piggyback off a previous mon's performance, moves that actually combo into other moves for more hearts, moves that gain you a ton of hearts but actually make it so you can't do anything the following round, but still leave you vulnerable to jamming, moves that totally prevent jamming, moves that give more hearts if you go first or last, moves that actually stop the audience from getting more excited about any other Pokemon's moves that entire round. There's a lot going on here, gamers. But with all of that out of the way, let's jump into the first category I tackled, the Cool Contest.
Objection. Overruled.
Overruled, Judge? Or is it overcooled?
The normal rank cool contest was easy enough, though, to be honest. The lower rank contests usually are kind of a cakewalk. So long as you've put at least some effort into raising your contest condition, you can usually blow everyone else out of the water during the introduction round, and as long as you don't totally choke during the appeals, you can typically win the lower rank contest just on the strength of your condition stat alone. That being said, I still had to let these entry-level coordinators know what was what during the normal rank contest, making sure to get pumped up for my extra hearts with Double Team, which also put me in a great position to jam them with X-Scissor, or just to get a great big chunk of hearts with Night Slash. And then, of course, during round 5, the audience meter lined up perfectly for me to drop a Hyper Beam, which I put in the moveset as a round 5 closer, and also as an emergency nuclear button if I ever needed it.
It's the only way to be sure.
Getting me a crap ton of baseline hearts and the full audience bonus, which also reminded me of just how cool Mega Absol looks during the Dark-type Spectacular Talent animation. Seriously, look at this! You're on top of a rocky pillar basically summoning a Breath of the Wild-style Blood Moon. I wouldn't be shocked if I won half of these contests because the other Pokemon got destroyed by a bunch of magically resurrected Bokoblins. Now, some of you who have been following me for a good few years probably look at that moveset and remember the ancient days of my Pokemon viewer battle streams on Twitch, and how I very specifically banned the use of moves that guaranteed evasion buffs, and probably ask yourself how I can suddenly abandon my principles and use a move like Double Team, but to be fair, Double Team kind of falls under the same umbrella as a lot of the stat buffing moves when it comes to contests, where they mostly just kind of all help prevent nervousness and buff future appeal moves, so you know, maybe get off my back. Anyway, after the first contest win, I was told someone was waiting for me in the green room, and hoo boy, it's LISIA. LISIA is a character added to the remakes who scouts you to be a potential star of contests pretty early on in the game's story, and actually gives you your contest pass and Pokeblock case, as well as the snazzy costume that you actually wear during the contests. She'll be in the green room after your first contest victory to congratulate you and encourage you, as well as give your victory its own snappy title that sounds like an anime episode. It's all pretty standard for the first meeting, but after your second contest victory, you're both interrupted by a rich boy named Chad, who, given his cocky demeanor, his rich boy character model, his totally misinterpreting the dynamic between himself and LISIA, the heavily implied and totally one-sided crush that he seems to have on her, and the fact that he's literally named Chaz, I'm simply choosing to believe that this is just Chaz Princeton from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, but just isekai'd into Pokemon. What, do Slade and Jagger Princeton believe that world domination can be achieved through Pokemon contests in this universe? Also, can we just take a second to talk about how Chaz's Machoke Macho Machiry has like a massive invisible wall around her for some reason. I don't really have a joke for this, I just wanted to point out how weird it was that Machiry seems to be operating with a massive personal force field. Anyway, the Super and Hyper Rank contests were more of the same really, given the sheer gap in condition stats between you and most of the NPCs you can face in any given category. It's the Master Rank where things get interesting, as that's the only rank where you're guaranteed to face other Pokemon that have condition stats in the triple digits. Luckily, the cool stats of the opponents I got were still nowhere near my maxed out coolness, so the introduction round was pretty much a lock, as always. But the talent round was a little rough, mainly because of these two. Trode, the Electrode, who can jam you with Discharge and otherwise just spam Sonic Boom, one of the only contest moves that can be used repeatedly without the audience getting bored, and Heracles, the Heracross, who can get a lot of appeal hearts if it uses Reversal last during a turn, and can majorly jam other contestants with Giga Impact. Seriously, I basically had my entire round 3 ruined by getting hit with Giga Impact and Discharge in the same turn, the latter of which set up Trode to get the full audience combo during round 4. But luckily, X-Scissor is especially jamming to those who also use cool moves in that round, so I managed to get plenty of hearts for myself while jamming away a good chunk of Trode's score, but still keeping myself just under what Trode's score was, setting myself up perfectly for round 5. Trode decided to use Explosion to close things out, which is a good idea for the final round since you can't do any more moves afterwards. But not so good if you go first during that round, especially if you're immediately followed by, say, an Absol with Hyper Beam that's being coordinated by an incredibly petty Pokemon trainer. I mean, yeah, we did all get fucked over by Heracles' Giga Impact in the end, but Dreadsight still ended off the round with a few more hearts. And more importantly, Trode had none, so Trode's big explosion gamut was pretty much entirely worthless. So to summarize, nya 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 nya, ha 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 ha. So despite Heracles blowing us all out of the water on the talent round, once again, Dreadsight's completely insurmountable coolness got us the W, and I proudly picked up my first Master Rank ribbon at the front desk, got some more congratulations from LISIA, and even saw Dreadsight's first portrait on the second floor of the Lily Cove Art Museum, which I definitely appreciated more than the random food items you get from the NPCs in the entryway after any given contest win. Look, I appreciate the gesture, and the occasional star piece is definitely nice, but how do I know that that Shalor Sable isn't laced with, like, Vileplume pollen? You can't tell me for sure that this little girl isn't on Chaz's payroll trying to drug me before the next contest circuit. Anyway, that's 1 category down and 4 to go, so next up, the Beautiful Contest.
I mean, look at me. How strange. Should watch road, but can't look away. Too beautiful.
So after coming to the realization that at some point I was going to have to make a lot of trips to the Move Maniac's house to relearn some older moves for the sake of my ever-shifting contest movesets, and unlike in the modern games, where relearning a move can be done in about 5 seconds in the status menu, the Move Maniac makes you give him 1 heart scale for every single time you use his services, I had to take a slight detour to Route 128 and then spend a few minutes fishing up love discs so I could steal their heart scales with Thief for future use. Once that was done, it was time to craft Dreadsight's beautiful moveset, which wasn't easy considering that it's quite a jump to go from the cool category, which is Absol's deepest move pool with 25 unique moves, to its most shallow and beautiful with a mere 18. At the very least, when it comes to moves it learns via TM or HM, I'm kinda spoiled for choice, since 13 of those 18 moves are by TM and HM alone, and thankfully I only needed 1 heart scale to get Perish Song back, a move that's not only strongly appealing by itself, but also, if another Pokemon uses a move from a category that the audience actively doesn't like using clever or tough moves in a beauty contest for example, they'll lose 2 appeal hearts that turn instead of 1. The normal and super contests went well enough, despite me not really getting good luck with the secondary effect of Will-O-Wisp. See, any of those contest moves that are like, makes the audience expect little of other contestants, that means you're meant to use it when a Pokemon does a move that's the first part of a big combo, and using a move like Will-O-Wisp is meant to draw the audience's attention away from that Pokemon and their combo. But sadly, no one ever actually set up a combo move on the same turn I actually did Wisp, so you know, fuck me, I guess. That and Will-O-Wisp itself is meant to start a combo that you finish with Hex, but Absol and Oras can only learn Hex via breeding, and I was not going to go through the whole process of breeding Hex on the Absol, feeding it Pokeblocks to max out its contest conditions again, and redo the cool contest circuit just for the sake of 1 combo that I didn't really need. And besides, the moveset also had Swords Dance, which is obviously a great stat buffer and nervousness preventative, and Ice Beam, which is pretty great if you just want a big fuck you move to throw at the Pokemon Pokemon directly before you. Of course, I had a bit of a rougher time in the Hyper Rank Beauty Contest, mostly thanks to this NPC, Lily, no relation to the girl from Sun and Moon, and her Camerops named Camelot, which not only runs Amnesia to make it totally resistant to being jammed for that turn by Ice Beam, but also Flame Burst, which is one of those moves that screws over a Pokemon setting up for a combo, which it actually managed to do to me during one round, which obviously would have been more devastating if I actually ran Hex, but more importantly, that also let Camelot swipe the 5th star for the full audience combo, which absolutely under any other circumstance won Camelot the entire contest had it not been doomed from the start by the fact that I'm the main character. Of course, that main character status would truly be put to the test for the first time in the Master Rank Beauty Contest, as this was my first encounter with the would-be contest rival to LISIA, the one and only Chaz. Honestly, I'm kinda surprised that it took this long to face Chaz in a contest, given that, after your first meeting with him, he has the chance to show up in any contest you enter from Super Rank upwards in any possible category, the only exception being the Tough Contest, since Chaz refuses to work on Machiri's toughness condition since he somehow thinks it would detract from Machiri's cuteness. Of course, Chaz not only never enters Machiri into a Tough Contest, but he also never even teaches her any tough moves. Machiri has 2 different movesets, one for Super Contest and another for Hyper and Master, but neither moveset uses any moves from the Tough category, despite Tough being Machoke's deepest contest move pool by far with a whopping 33 unique moves. And in a true stroke of irony, Machiri's Hyper and Master moveset actually has 2 moves from the Beautiful category, Round and Sunny Day, despite Beautiful being far and away Machoke's most shallow move pool in a mere 8 moves, with absolutely none of those being learned by level up, which likely just speaks to Chaz's mostly fruitless attempts to appeal to LISIA and position himself as her one and only contest rival. To their credit, Chaz and Machiri did give me a bit of trouble in this contest, with Machiri getting the full audience excitement bonus as early as round 2 with a well-timed Sunny Day, and the fact that Dreadscythe finally managed to hit a Will-O-Wisp on a round where a Pokemon set up a combo move didn't even matter, since Machiri's moveset doesn't even have a move that combos with Sunny Day anyway. Certainly didn't help that Machiri used that commanding lead to make Dreadscythe nervous with Attract and cost her the whole of round 3 either. The best I could do was just throw out a Perish Song in round 5 just to get the 2-star boosted Appeal Hearts and hope for the best. Oh, and big shout out to the Wobbuffet in this contest for lowering the audience meter with Destiny Bond just so Machiri couldn't get the full audience combo a second time. That's the kind of pettiness I really admire. Of course, it didn't matter that Machiri, and even the Vileplume in this contest, both completely decimated me in the talent round, because Dreadscythe managed to win it all by the power of her sheer unbridled charisma. Seriously, this is probably one of the most egregious examples of you just being able to get hard carried by a maxed out condition stat, because if everything was even on the intro round, I would have been destroyed, but don't tell Chaz that. Gotta keep him humble. Anyway, with the Beauty Master ribbon obtained, it's time for category number 3, the Q Contest.
Listen up, scum. I want information.
Oh, look at a cute little hamster.
Don't call me.
Building Dreadscythe's Cute Contest moveset was definitely interesting. Absol's Cute move pool isn't exactly shallow, with a decent 20 unique moves to it, but the only jamming move that Absol gets access to in this category is Frustration, which kinda makes score manipulation here a little bit of an issue. So instead, I went with Hone Claws for the stat buff, Attract for a chance to make any subsequent Pokemon nervous, and 2 moves that form an actual combo for once. Rest, which makes the user oblivious to any jamming attempts, and Sleep Talk, which has that weird effectiveness depends on when it's used effect that doesn't really explain itself at all, but at least the combo with Rest makes sense. What doesn't make sense to me is how I only ever seem to make anyone nervous with Attract one time on exactly one Pokemon across both the normal and Super Rank Q contests. Look, I know it's a dice roll as to whether it works or not, but I feel like Attract should have worked more than once ever across 2 contests. I mean, my luck can't be that bad. This is kind of one of those times where I wish that abilities would actually play into contests at all, because you just know that an Absol with super luck would be hitting these Attracts way more often. Anyway, I made it to the Hyper Rank contest, and oh great, now I gotta deal with you again. Well, putting Chaz back in his place shouldn't be that tough as long as— oh fuck me, you're here too? Yeah, apparently the game just thought it would be really funny to have one contest with both Chaz and Lily, as if they got together like 2 anime villains joining forces specifically to make sure I didn't win. Well, good to know I'm at least not the only one here with crappy Attract RNG, and at least Camelot's Flame Burst can't ruin my combo this time, especially good because I actually have a combo now, because Rest is not only a setup move, but it also being an Obliviousness move keeps Dread Scythe safe from having the audience get dazzled, so, you know, as long as she gets to her next move safely and hits the Sleep Talk, then... Ha, nerd. Appreciate you setting my Absol Sleep Talk up for the full audience combo, though. Alright, Dread Scythe, it's round 4. We got a commanding lead. Time to land this Attract and... Oh, come on, Arceus! Despite me yet again having the worst luck in the universe with Attract, at least I got the full audience combo again in round 5 to seal the deal. And this time there's no question who won that contest. Devastating lead in both the intro and talent rounds. It's all coming up, Dread Scythe, baby! Time for the Master Rank of the Q contest, and... Oh great, you again. Thankfully, Chaz didn't come into this one with a supervillain team-up, so it was a lot easier to manage him. I even actually managed to hit a couple of the tracks in this contest, one of which was actually on Machiri, which actually made it all the sweeter when she tried to do it to me in round 5 and only hit the love disc right in front of me, and her Attract just happened to put the audience meter at 4 stars, which, you know, for Dread Scythe, who was about to hit that sweet Rest Talk combo again, was basically free real estate. And with another crushing defeat of Chaz and Machiri in the books, the Cute Master Ribbon was secured. Next up, the Clever Contest.
Quorum he, Vitio Morianis!
Morianis? Morianis Vestris Incipiat Rem Totem!
Thankfully for Dread Scythe, her options for the Clever move pool are a bit wider than the Cute one, given that it's Absol's second biggest category with 23 unique moves to it, second only to Cool at 25, and both of these categories are actually tied for the second most unique jamming moves in the category with 5 apiece. And honestly, Clever being the second deepest move pool for Contest does make a fair bit of sense for Absol, given how many Psychic and Dark-type moves Absol has access to anyway, both of which more often than not end up as Clever moves. Anyway, for the Clever contest, I went with Calm Mind for the stat buff, Pursuit to jam anyone before Dread Scythe who also uses Clever moves in that same round. Also, Game Freak, please bring back Pursuit, I miss it so much. And I decided to round things out with a pseudo combo of Me First and Sucker Punch, the former of which guarantees Dread Scythe will go first on the next round, and the latter of which gets way more appeal hearts when it's done first. The normal rank contest was more of the usual. Aside from a pretty disastrous round 1 where Dread Scythe not only had her stat buff cancelled out by a Ninkada's Mud Slap, but then also got jammed so bad that she actually ended up in the negatives. We pulled it back in the end though, cause, you know, main characters. Once I got to the super rank though, it was time to Chaz it up again. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised that it took this long to face Chaz and Machiri in a Super Rank contest, but I guess it does finally give me a chance to talk about Machiri's Super Rank moveset since it's different from the Hyper and Master one. This time, Machiri is running Brick Break for a solid 4-heart appeal, Bulk Up for the stat buff, and the one and only jamming move in Machiri's arsenal between all movesets, Low Sweep, which only startles whoever moves directly before her. I assume this being the only instance of jamming in any of Machiri's movesets is another way of Chaz trying to appeal to LISIA, given her philosophy about contests being about having fun and enjoying the wonder of Pokemon, rather than focusing on winners and losers, but Chaz, being the competitive wannabe rival that he is, just couldn't help himself but to give Machiri at least one move to mess other coordinators up. And speaking of LISIA, the one Machiri move that's consistent between all ranks is Attract, which is likely just a reference to both Chaz's implied and utterly one-sided crush on LISIA, as well as Machiri's more apparent and possibly not one-sided crush on LISIA's Altaria Alley. Anyway, round 1 went predictably enough, with both Chaz and I choosing to buff our respective mon stats, though Chaz seemingly forgot that cool moves like Bulk Up don't really go over well with a Clever audience, but once round 2 started, it became very obvious what the plan was. Get a stat buff for future use, and do a move that would hopefully put Machiri just behind Dread Scythe, so that after Dread Scythe hit a Pursuit that only kinda sorta startled the other two mons, Machiri was right behind her to sweep the leg and jam the living crap out of her. Obviously, after so many humiliating defeats at the hands of Dread Scythe and myself, Chaz didn't just want Dread Scythe beaten, he wanted her out of commission. Luckily, we got some payback in round 4. Machiri was just ahead of us and decided to pull that sweep the leg crap on a poor defenseless Lotad, but seemingly forgot that Dread Scythe was right behind her, and that the audience meter was at 4 stars, and that Dread Scythe was about to use Pursuit, and that Low Sweep just happens to be a Clever move. Shame that that poor before Lotad got caught in the crossfire of all that, but this thing between Chaz and me, this was war, and I was taking no prisoners in my pursuit of abject humiliation. One very audience-exciting going for a sucker punch later, and the Super Rank Clever contest was in the books. And, perhaps just as importantly as all that, Chaz and Machiri came in dead last. Yeah, that's what you get for trying to Cobra Kai me, you jerks. Thankfully, there was no sign of Chaz in the Hyper or Master Rank contest, so it was back to business as usual. You know, aside from once again ending round 1 of the Hyper contest below 0, thanks in no small part to this Lyron named Wan constantly hitting me with metal sound. Don't worry though, gamers. Plot armor came through in the end. That's the Cleverness Master Ribbon obtained and 4 categories down, with 1 to... Oh, I have a guest in the green room. Huh, must be LISIA ready to give me another snappy title for... Oh, it's you. Surprisingly though, Chaz isn't here to totally dump on me. In fact, he lets me know that LISIA has been practicing super hard to be able to do a contest together with me, and in a rare show of humility, flat out admits that he'd never be able to stand toe-to-toe with LISIA, despite how badly he really wanted to do so, and actually tells me that he's pulling for me to clear the last master rank so that I could do a contest with LISIA. Aw, that's actually really nice. Or, you know, it would be if you hadn't tried to pull that low sweep crap during the clever circuit, you douche! Anyway, with all of that taken care of, it's out with the brains and in with the brawn, cause we're down to our final contest category, the Tough Contest!
I guess I'm just too tough to cry.
Just today you were crying about snakes.
They don't have any arms.
For the Tough Contest, I decided to really lean into typical Dark-type behavior by loading up on moves that really mess with other contestants. Thief, to basically piggyback off the appeal strength of the Pokemon in front of me, Torment as the tough facsimile for Attract, and Spite to badly jam any Pokemon who successfully showed their appeal that turn. Not that I wasn't spoiled for choice on jamming moves, mind you, as Tough, as a general category, has the highest amount of jamming moves overall in the entire game at a whopping 40, and, incidentally, Tough is also Absol's deepest move pool as far as jamming moves go, with it being able to learn 6 out of those 40 moves itself. For the 4th slot though, I actually decided to bring back a move from the Beauty Contest circuit, Swords Dance, which not only acts as a stat buff, but could also help with manipulating the audience meter, since Beauty is one of those categories that actually lowers the meter for the Tough crowd, which could theoretically help prevent certain Pokemon from getting the 5-star bonus. True to his word, there was no sign of Chaz anywhere in the Tough circuit, given his refusal to work on Machiri's toughness condition, but this contest circuit was still, well, pretty tough, actually. I mean, don't get me wrong here, Normal and Super went well enough. Hell, I actually managed to connect with Torment a good few times, especially during the Super Contest, but Hyper is where things started to get a little rocky, especially with Wan the Lyron coming back for revenge from the Clever Circuit, not to mention another NPC, Primo, and his Machop Chop, basically blowing us all out of the water in the talent round while we were all too busy having our petty little slap fight. And then, in the Master Rank Contest, I had to deal with another former foe, this time Heracles the Heracross from all the way back in the Cool Circuit. And that's actually a really apropos word to describe him, because he absolutely kept his cool in round 1, managing to not get unnerved by both Dreadsight's Torment and a Scald from a Sharpedo. Seriously, are we like 100% sure that abilities don't come into play here? Because that was some pure, unadulterated moxie. Not only did Heracles end up getting a ton of appeal hearts with a couple of well-timed reversals after that, but then in round 5, after I tried to be smart and lower the audience meter with Swords Dance so no one would get the 5-star combo, Heracles decided to just slam the big red button and Giga Impact me to drop me to -3, and then Sharpedo's Rage and Dusclop's Spite just made it worse. Okay, I know I said earlier that the Master Rank Beauty Contest was a pretty blatant example of being hard carried by your condition stat, but this was even more egregious. Like, this whole Master Rank Contest was just poor Dreadscythe getting the appeal hearts stomped out of her by everyone else, and if it wasn't for her main character plot armor, this absolutely would have been a loss. Hell, she never even got to Mega Evolve this entire circuit. You know that bit earlier where I showed all 5 versions of the Dark-type Spectacular Talent animation? I actually had to do a completely separate Tough contest just to get that footage for the Tough version. Shit's rough in the Tough circuit, man. But, bruises to my ego aside, we made it out of that hellscape with the Toughness Master ribbon intact, which means finally, at long last, the Contest Star ribbon, the ribbon that I started this entire ridiculous journey for, was finally mine, and the whole world would know that my beloved Absol Dreadscythe was the one true shining star. It was finally over. Or was it? I had won every single Master Rank contest. I had the contest star ribbon. I had Dreadscythe immortalized in every single contest hall and the Lily Cove Art Museum, and I had droves of fans hanging on my every single word. But there was still one loose end to tie up, one more mountain to climb. The contest idol herself, LISIA. This poor girl had been waiting all this time for someone who could really bring out the best in her in a contest. Arceus knows she was never going to get that from Chaz, and hey, she is the one that scouted me for contests and gave me all the necessary key items to begin with, so what kind of coordinator? Hell, what kind of main character would I be if I didn't give her the contest of a lifetime? Now, LISIA didn't specify what category she wanted to do a contest in, just that it had to be a Master Rank contest, so I kind of figured it'd be a fun idea to bring it back to where it all started with another run at the Cool Contest, especially since Cool is the category with Absol's deepest move pool, so you would theoretically give me the best chance of winning. In fact, looking at their total move pools, Absol has Altaria beat by a mile, with Absol clocking in at 107 unique moves to Altaria's 88. Plus, even if you don't account for the fact that my cool condition is maxed out and just blows every NPC out of the water, Ali's cool condition of 378 isn't even one of his two highest condition stats, and unlike his cute and clever movesets, the cool moveset doesn't even have anything that can unnerve you, nor does it have a move to prevent being jammed like in his beautiful moveset. That being said, this still wasn't going to be that easy, since Ali's cool moveset still runs Dragon Dance for a stat buff, Tailwind to go first next turn so he can get lots of appeal hearts with Aerial Ace, and Outrage as a nuclear option at the cost of being far more susceptible to jamming for the rest of that turn. As for my moveset, I went with Double Team for the stat buff, Thunder Wave as a serious jamming move, Razor Wind to try and piggyback off a previous appeal, and good old Hyper Beam if I ever need to drop the nuke myself. This was going to be a showdown for the ages, the contest of all contests, the test to see who truly is the shining star of Hoenn. You just know it's gonna be a high-stakes contest when 3 out of the 4 Pokemon use a stat buff move on the first round, and oh god damn it, Heracles is back, this is gonna be a problem. But you know, not nearly as much of a problem as Ali almost immediately getting the full audience combo with Tailwind in round 2, not only ensuring that he goes first on the next turn, but also gaining so many appeal hearts that my Thunder Wave hardly even phased him. Ali going first the next round paid dividends pretty big with Aerial Ace, and even if the Gyarados in this contest named Galaxy had jammed him up a fair bit, it still hardly did anything to help any of us close the gap. Well, any of us except for Heracles, of course, who just happened to hit reversal in the last slot of the turn again. Well, never mind that, because Ali comes into round 4 with a Tailwind and gets the full audience combo again! Man, if there was any doubt that LISIA has earned her spot as the contest star of Hoenn, I think they got destroyed about as quickly as I did by Galaxy's Hyper Beam. But hey, at least it put Heracles in the negative, so you know, swings and roundabouts. Oh wait, it literally doesn't matter because it's round 5 and now there's no way for me to prevent Heracles from ruining any chance I have to catch up with Ali because of friggin' Giga Impact. Okay, it's totally fine, you know, no big deal. I mean, I've basically coasted through most of this by having maxed out conditions, so surely that'll make the difference during the final judging, right? Right? We lost. LISIA and Ali overcame all our best efforts, overcame our main character plot armor to clinch the win, and pretty decisively at that. What would being a shining star even mean for Dreadscythe if she couldn't beat Ali? What would being a master coordinator mean for me if I couldn't beat LISIA? Would I just have to go back to the modern games with my tail between my legs, burdened with the knowledge that my legacy as a coordinator would always have an Altaria-shaped asterisk? Could I even call myself a true coordinator at all? Oh wait, this is a video game. I could literally just try again. So, after a bit of a break to get some snacks and get my head on straight, it was time for the rematch. The second attempt was already off to a way better start, since there was no sign of Heracles anywhere, being replaced by a Loudred, so I'm just gonna go ahead and assume that last check from Chaz bounced pretty hard. Round 1 was basically a repeat of the first run, but thankfully I was ahead of Allie this time in round 2, and even more thankfully, the Loudred decided to just spam Echoed Voice, and Galaxy went with Thrash, neither of which did anything to budge the audience meter from its 4-star standing, which means Dread Scythe was able to swoop in and hit a Thunder Wave, not only severely jamming both of them, but getting the 5-star audience bonus for herself. Yeah, drink it in, Allie. That's what a real contest star looks like. Not even your desperate outrage could catch you up. I knew Allie was going first in round 4 thanks to a Tailwind, and I was dead last in the turn order, so I figured round 4 would be a good time to pop a Thunder Wave, you know, just to make sure I could lessen the impact of Allie's Aerial Ace, but still putting me just behind him for round 5. And with Allie settling for a desperate repeat of Aerial Ace, and me being just after him in the turn order, it was time to click the button. Seriously, I would have been glad to get the win by any means, but ending that rematch with a Mega Evolved +2 Hyper Beam was so satisfying. This genuinely felt like an anime pro tag coming back from a major setback and beating the big bad of that story arc once and for all. So, what's your reward for beating LISIA in a Master Rank contest? The thing that this was all building up towards? Well, LISIA gives you a Starlight for your secret base, which is pretty neat. Also, Game Freak, please bring back Gen 3 style secret bases. Oh, and also Chaz shows up to get humbled one last time, says he's going to enter Machiry into the tough circuit after all, and even gives you Lucario Knight. For some reason. Regardless of all of that though, we've now truly reached the end of this roller coaster ride. The contest star ribbon is mine, and now everyone in Hoenn knows that I'm the best coordinator to ever set foot in these hallowed halls. It's truly, finally over. Or is it? See, after that last big cutscene, you could talk to LISIA again, and she tells you all about her uncle, who, like you, is apparently great at both battling and Pokemon contests, and wants to introduce him to you. Which is basically the game's way of saying that this contest subplot has a secret super boss, one final contest opponent who's apparently just been waiting in the shadows this whole time like Omega Weapon in Final Fantasy VIII. And just who is this mysterious uncle that LISIA speaks of? Is it the Unova region's actor turned gym leader Bryson, the culinary artist of Kalos' Elite Four, Cybold, the curator from the Lily Cove Art Museum who's been using the contest portraits as an excuse to study my coordination techniques in order to craft the perfect strategy to beat me? Okay, that would have been an amazing twist actually, but LISIA's uncle is none other than the water-type gym leader of Sutopolis City, Wallace. Alright, I'm gonna be super honest with you all for a second. I do not remember this at all from my original playthrough of this game in 2014, and to be fair to myself for a second, he does only become available after you enter the Hall of Fame for the first time, but considering that Wallace dresses like this and also preludes his gym battle by doing this, yeah, no, him being a contest coordinator totally scans, actually. Of course, for this final contest, you'll need to go to a contest hall and do a Master Rank Beauty contest specifically, and he'll enter his beloved ace Pokemon, Milotic, who's basically the poster child for beauty contests in Pokemon, considering that in the original Gen 3 games, boosting your Feebas's beauty condition was literally the only way to get it. As such, Wallace's Milotic not only has a beauty condition of 320, still not quite as high as his niece's Altaria, mind you, but definitely still high enough to give you a run for your money in the introduction round, but also has a moveset of nothing but beautiful moves. Aqua Ring for the stat boost, Aqua Tail for a raw 4-heart appeal, Round to get more appeal hearts if the Pokemon before it uses the same type of move, and Blizzard for a big jam. As for me, I decided to go with a mix of beautiful and cute moves, the latter of which were something I figured I could use to stop the audience meter from growing without it actually moving backwards at all. I went with Sword Stance for the stat buff, Ice Beam to jam whatever's in front of me, and the classic Rest Talk combo to round things out. I didn't know if this would be enough to get the best of this bombastic, beautiful bastard, but we were gonna give it our all. No matter how hard it was, no matter how many tries it took, Dread Scythe and I would leave everything on that contest stage to finally defeat this ultimate super unstoppable. I beat him on the first try. Like, okay, it wasn't a total wash, and things did get a little dicey in round 5 when Milotic had a very well-timed round, but I was right behind her with an Ice Beam to take away a few of those hearts. Seriously, I came out of that contest like, I thought you were stronger. And that is, wait, let me double check. Yes? Like for real this time? Okay, that actually is the end of the contest journey. I mean, Wallace and LISIA can each give you one last little bit of lore in the green room, and they can still show up in Master Rank contests from time to time, but finally, truly, at long last, my journey to take my favorite Pokemon through every single contest for one very specific in-game title corresponding to a ribbon that I saw one time during one specific VGC Regional is finally over. Overall, this whole experience was actually really fun. Not only was it a halfway decent excuse to replay a bit of one of my favorite remakes, and obviously to play a game with my favorite Pokemon in it, but also to rediscover my love for one of my favorite Pokemon side quests. Admittedly, I did make most of this a bit too easy for myself with the maxed out conditions because, seriously, it's kind of ridiculous how often you can get away with a subpar showing in the talent round and still win based on your condition alone, so if you want to do this yourself and give yourself a bit of a challenge, maybe don't quite max out your condition stats right out of the gate like I did. Also, if you're having trouble beating LISIA for the first time, take her on in a tough contest. Seriously, that's where Ali's lowest condition stat is, and his moveset there has no protection from jamming or nervousness, so, you know, go nuts. But in any case, this was really fun to do, and honestly, it was a nice way for me to celebrate 10 years of a video game that, at one point, was far and away the Pokemon game I put the most individual hours into, prior to the release of Sword and Shield, that is. I just hope that the older ribbons and their corresponding in-game titles still carry over to Pokemon Legends ZA, especially because we know from that first teaser trailer that Absol is definitely confirmed for it, because more than anything else, I would love for everyone in future games to be able to see the shining star that my favorite Pokemon really is. So yeah, that about wraps up what I'm sure is going to be an entirely too long video about me replaying Pokemon Contests in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. This took a good bit of time and so much editing to put together, so I would actually really appreciate it if you could all hit the like button and share this video everywhere to help it get the love it deserves. Oh, and leave a comment down below telling me if you were ever a fan of Pokemon Contests back when they were a thing. I'd love to hear from some fellow coordinators. Also, I don't think I've ever mentioned this in a video, but I have a wish list on Throne. If you've ever wanted to get your local blue-haired nerd something cool, that's a great place to do it. And hey, November is my birthday month, so what better time, right? But hey, zero pressure to ever do anything like that, and supporting my content here on YouTube is always free and very, very appreciated. Alright, take care of yourselves, everybody, and drink water. See you in the next video, friendos.